Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we will be learning Parshat Mattot, and this is the second last portion of the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, and it's a parsha of transition. That Mattot actually means it can mean staff or it can mean tribe. And here we have Moshe. We're going through what's called the changing of the guard. In last week's parsha, God reminds Moshe that he will not be leading Israel into the Holy Land. And Moshe requests that there has to be a leader. There has to be a shepherd for the sheep. And so God commands him to appoint Yoshua. And that was last week's parsha. And in this week's parsha, it begins by Moshe addressing the heads of the tribes. So we see, as we're getting towards the end of the book of Bamidbar, we have what's called the changing of the guard. Right after that is, though, a war that Israel fights against Midian. This is an after effect, the consequence of the daughters of Midian coming and getting the men involved in idol worship, in an orgy. This was all at the end of Parshat Balak, and it was discussed in brief in Parshat Pinchas. And now there is going to be a war. We should be reminded that at the end of Parshat Balak, it mentions that 24,000 people died in the plague that broke out as a result, a consequence of their sinning. Israel fell to a very, very low level. If we remember, it was Bilam's advice. Bilam wanted to curse the Jews, but he was unable to. He could only give blessings, but he was determined. So he came up with this idea: as you want to curse the Jews, chas v'sholom, get them to sin. And so it was his idea to send the daughters of Midian, the daughters of Moab. So now God instructs Moshe to lead a war against Midian. So we are going to go to chapter 31, verses 4 and 5. So as part of the instructions, it says, Elef lamate, lakol matot Yisrael tishlechu letzava. So it says 1,000, here it means 1,000 warriors, 1,000 people in the army per tribe, but it repeats it twice. Elef lamate, 1,000 for each tribe, 1,000 for each tribe. Every tribe will send to the army. And then it says, V'yimasru ma'alfei Yisrael, 1,000 lamate, shneim asar elef chalutzei tzava. Then it says that these soldiers were given over, were delivered among the thousands of Israel, 1,000 per tribe, 12,000 soldiers ready for battle. So this is the one verse that we're going to be discussing tonight. And we're going to see it has tremendous relevance to this day. So the question is, anytime you have a double language, elef lamate, 1,000 for a tribe, 1,000 for a tribe, why does the Torah have to double the language? What are we learning from this? There are many examples, not a tremendous number, but there are many examples in the Torah of a double language. Many times the sages explain that it's for emphasis, that it's not necessarily that we learn something new from the second language, but it's an emphasis of the importance of whatever is being discussed or commanded. Other times, though, they find that there is extra meaning, because it doesn't have to say 2 times Elif Lamate. Could have said it once. And so sometimes they learn an additional teaching from the fact that it's doubled. Here we have 3 different opinions of the double language here. The first opinion is actually Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, basically, it's for emphasis. Only 1,000 came from each tribe. That was the call it the reality. 1,000 came from each tribe. And that's why the second verse says 12,000. Rabbi Yishmael says, no, 2,000 were sent from each tribe. How did he explain it, though? Because it's the second verse says clearly that there were 1,000 for the army. So here there are 2 different explanations of the second 12,000. One of them is that there were 1,000 per tribe to fight, and there were 1,000 per tribe to support the war effort. An example I'll use, in any war, you have to have what are called supply lines. And this is very, very appropriate, because when Russia attacked the Ukraine, they were hoping that it would be a very short war. They threw hundreds, if not thousands, of tanks, and they wanted to surround the capital city and the government and just make them give up immediately, surrender. And what happened, though, is, but again, just from what I read, is there was not much thought in supply lines. So they sent these tremendous amount of soldiers into battle, and the Ukrainians had stiff resistance. And all of a sudden, they didn't have the supplies they needed, not the food, not the medical, not the ammunition. And of course, this happened with Germany when it attacked Russia. And it got caught in the Russian winter, and they were totally unprepared. They didn't have the supporting troops. They weren't the fighters, but they were the support. So that's one of the opinions, Elif Lamate, 1,000 for a tribe, 1,000 for a tribe. The other opinion is there were 1,000 to fight and 1,000 to pray. And in a minute, we're going to see the importance of that. In other words, there were only 1,000 soldiers, but they understood that every physical battle had to have the proper spiritual support in order to win. The third opinion is that there were actually 3,000 from each tribe. Why? Because in one verse it says, Elif Lamate, 1,000 for a tribe, 1,000 for a tribe. And then the next verse, again, it says 1,000 for a tribe. So the third opinion is there were actually 3,000 from each tribe, 1,000 to fight, 1,000 to pray, and 1,000 for support. So here we have 3 different opinions. One of the reasons I wanted to discuss this, and I'm not going to go deeply into politics, and I'm not going to really give an opinion here, perhaps later if we want to discuss it. But it is such a topic of discussion right now, because we know that from the inception of the state of Israel, yeshiva students were given a free pass, that they did not have to join the army. When David Ben Gurion did that, there were a few hundred yeshiva students. And actually, the secular Zionist, in a way, saw religious Judaism as almost kind of like ready for the museum. They saw it was still relevant and alive and important, but they didn't have the vision to see the explosion of the population of the religious communities in Israel and around the world. Now, there are, every year, there's tens of thousands of new 18-year-olds who still have the same non-obligation to go into the army. The Supreme Court in Israel just ruled that it is unconstitutional that a part of the population has an automatic free pass from the army. Anyways, really for 75 years, it's been a very hotly disputed subject. First we have to divide between, in the religious world, a good part of the army now is what's called the religious Zionist religious population. They are not just for going into the army, but a good part of the army and also of the leadership of the army is now religious. But the Haredi section, so their explanation is we are doing our part. We are learning Torah and we're praying, and without us, there would be no success on the battlefield. Now, this is the reason I'm bringing this, because this is not a new idea. This is an idea that goes back to the discussion of the sages 2,000 years ago. Just trying to explain the simple, literal meaning of the text. 1,000 from each tribe, 1,000 from each tribe. What does it mean? So we saw two of the three opinions included the idea that it was important that there would be a section of Israel where they would be learning and praying. So this is a very important discussion now, very important, especially after the Supreme Court ruled that it's unconstitutional, and actually the army has started sending out notices to the Haredi community who are in the age group that it affects them of enlistment. How it's going to play out is not clear. It's literally being discussed every single day here. How many will be allowed to stay in yeshiva? How many will be will have to go into the army? Who and what age? And it's a whole discussion, but it just shows that the Torah is ever relevant, and it's always talking about topics that still affect us today. Here we could read this and think, well, this is about a war fought over 3,000 years ago. What do we even need to know about it? But like everything in the Torah, it has archetypal and everlasting relevance. Now, the Baal Turim, on the first verse that we read, Elef Lamate, Lakal Mattot Yisrael Tishlachu L'Tzavah. 1,000 per tribe, 1,000 per tribe. Each tribe will send to the army. So the Baal HaTurim points out that this verse begins with an aleph and ends with an aleph. The Baal HaTurim, he was a master of all the different methods through which the Torah is darshaned, is explained, the inner dimensions of the Torah. For those of you who have 70 faces, we did a whole year course on this. Excuse me. The Baal HaTurim is probably quoted more than anyone because he was such an important link in the chain of legitimate methods used to explain the Torah, from its literal meaning to its allegorical to its mystical. So here he points out that this verse begins with an aleph and ends with an aleph. Aleph numerically equals 1. So he just makes a simple statement that we see from this that that when they went to war, there was a total unity among the people. Because again, aleph equals 1. So the beginning of the verse and the end of the verse, in other words, from beginning to end, all of Israel felt part of this battle. Again, this is so relevant for all of Jewish history, but especially in the last 75 years, all the wars that we have fought. And we all know Israel is a democracy, has many different opinions on every different subject, and sometimes very, very sharp differences. But when it comes to the fighting of the war, it's amazing how Israel comes together. We've mentioned this many times, but we'll say it again, that the day before October 7th, there was such division in Israel. It was like the worst that people had ever remembered. It was just terrible, terrible fighting and disagreement and threats and terrible language and accusations. And then October 7th came, and just everyone just dropped all disagreements and came together. Here we are now, almost 10 months later, and now we have many disagreements again, just because it's so unclear how to continue at this point. What is the right strategy? But nonetheless, among the soldiers who are fighting in Gaza, up north, defending us against missile attacks from Yemen, from Iran, from Iraq, from Syria, from Lebanon. Everyone's into it. Doesn't matter if you're left-wing, right-wing, religious, not religious, Ashkenazi, Sephardi. Those people who are actually fighting, there's a tremendous unity among them. Tremendous. Here, the disagreements are more like political as to, okay, what do we do next? What's the proper strategy? What's the proper move to try to be victorious in our efforts here? And that there are disagreements. But here, the Baal HaTurim is pointing out this idea of this unity. And this is very, very important, because in the story of receiving the Torah at Sinai, so it says, we came to the desert of Sinai, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, and Israel camped across from the mountain. And the very, very famous repeated Rashi is the word Vayichan, they camped, is written in the singular. one would expect it to be in the plural. And he said, this teaches us that they came to Sinai k'ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart, total unity. And then the question is asked, well, where did that unity come from? Because Rashi points out that this kind of unity didn't repeat itself. It was a very unique type of unity. But if you look at just the timeline, right before we came to Sinai is when we fought against Amalek. We literally came from the battle of Amalek to Har Sinai. And the war against Amalek brought us together in a tremendous unity. So that unity was still ever present when we came to the desert of Sinai. And that's why Rashi could say we came k'ish echad b'lev echad. Now, in the second verse that we read, so it says, V'imasru mi'alfa Yisrael elf l'matei. And so masru means they were given over, they were delivered. In other words, each tribe provided the 1,000 soldiers, or the 2,000 or the 3,000, depending on the various opinions. But we want to look at the word v'yimasru. So this is the root of the phrase mesirut nefesh. Mesirut nefesh, mesira means to give over one's soul. The most extreme example is if someone gives over their soul in what's called Kiddush Hashem, where they literally give up their soul in order to sanctify God's name, or they give up their soul simply for being a Jew. So of course, this has followed us throughout Jewish history, and it is an extreme case, but unfortunately, it's happened quite literally millions of times in Jewish history that Jews burned at the stake, gassed in the gas chambers, and everything in between, just to protect our tradition. On a less scale, mesirut nefesh means anytime you give your all to an endeavor, and especially when you're helping other people. And that's what's called mesirut nefesh. That person had mesirut nefesh for this mitzvah, or in this situation, or this possibility. So that's the verb here. And so there's a very, very important teaching from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said that the greatest merit that the Jewish people have, especially today, the merit to have a Medina, to have a state, is the willingness of the soldiers of our army to be ready to give up their lives at literally any moment for protecting our ability to live here. We're seeing it again on a daily level. Unfortunately, lately, it's rare that a day goes by that at least one soldier is not killed, either up north or down south. So we're seeing this on a daily level, that soldiers are giving their life to protect the country. So this is just very important. And here again, we just read these verses in the context of a war fought 3,300 years ago, but we see how timely these the questions, the realities are to our lives today. So we should be blessed that no more soldiers have to give up their life, that the Jewish people can keep a strong unity in our belief of our right to be here, our right to defend ourselves, and our belief that someday peace will come.